where has an unofficial deadline for foreigners to leave left South Africa. Anti-immigration groups threatened more violence against undocumented migrants who failed to exit the country by June 30th. We'll explore the day after and ask whether the controversial action could improve or impair South African lives. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is South Africa. The June 30th deadline set by South African anti-immigration groups has passed, but the struggle between some South African citizens and their immigrant population continues. On Tuesday, thousands marched across the country with isolated clashes and looting reported. Troops were deployed in parts of Johannesburg and Durban, while organizers and supporters vowed to continue their campaign.
This 30th of June is the beginning. This is a start. And I'm sorry to say that I don't think they do have a capacity to stop us from doing what we are going to do.
Well, for weeks, anti-immigration groups like March and March demanded undocumented foreign nationals leave South Africa or risk violent reprisal. Supporters say they're simply enforcing immigration law where the government has failed. But critics warn the campaign encourages vigilantism and puts South Africa at odds with its neighbors and human rights. News of the unofficial deadline spread fast across communities and social media, prompting thousands of migrants to leave quickly if they had that option.
Everyone is feeling like to go and protect his life, because here they are threat of maybe being died, you can be killed, so no one is happy to be here.
Of course, it's not easy to go home because we know even in Zimbabwe it's difficult, but we just have to go because we are scared. We just want to protect ourselves. We just want to be safe.
In the community, they were like Somalians, Malawians, Zimbabweans, Zambians, Congos. So many of them fled. Others, they are still there living, but they are looking inside their houses.
Well, those fears are not unfounded. The deadline didn't create this crisis. It exposed one that's been building for decades. Here's a look.
In 2008, xenophobic attacks swept across South Africa, leaving 62 people dead and tens of thousands displaced. Violence returned in 2015, claiming 7 lives and forcing around 5,000 people into temporary shelters. 4 years later, another wave of attacks left 12 people dead as businesses were looted across Johannesburg. By 30th of June 2026, an unofficial anti-migrant deadline had prompted thousands to leave. For many, it wasn't just a date on the calendar. It was a reminder of South Africa's painful history of xenophobic violence.
Now, the government said it wouldn't allow a repeat of the violence from previous years, and fortunately, Tuesday's rallies were mostly peaceful. Thousands of police and members of the military were deployed across the country under an emergency security budget of about $37 million. But many businesses still turned to private security companies.
Enforcement of the law is the responsibility of the state and no one else. Thus, we are ready as a state to protect every person, citizen, and foreign nationals against any form of abuse and intimidation.
One of the biggest arguments driving this debate is jobs. Supporters of the June 30th campaign say undocumented migrants are taking work from South Africans at a time when unemployment is among the highest in the world. So is there evidence to show that migrants are to blame?
With millions of South Africans out of work, competition for jobs has become one of the country's defining political issues. At the same time, international organizations and researchers say migrants make up only a small share of South Africa's population. A World Bank study also found migrant workers can support employment by increasing demand for goods, services, and local businesses. That conclusion is shared by some of South Africa's biggest labor organizations. The Congress of South African Trade Unions argues the country's economic problems cannot simply be blamed on foreign nationals.
For many South Africans, though, the debate isn't being shaped by academic studies or union statements. It's being shaped by the reality of searching for work in an economy that's struggled to create jobs for decades. So has immigration become the easiest scapegoat for a much deeper crisis that the government has failed to address?
South Africans are not xenophobic. South Africans are Africans. They want to live with other Africans peacefully. And our people are calling on us as leaders to resolve the many challenges that are brought to bear by the challenge of migration.
So in spite of those words from the president, others argue the country that once inspired Africa has now definitively turned on its fellow Africans. But will expelling migrants solve any of South Africa's core problems, including poverty as well as lacking education and development? Joining me now to debate that and much more are from Redcliffe, Zimbabwe, political commentator and columnist Tendai Ruben Mbofana. From Johannesburg, acting national spokesperson for the African National Congress, Nonceba Mhlauli. And from Oxford, professor and migration specialist at Wits University, Loren Landau. Thank you all so much for being with me. Loren, I'll just start with you to get kind of a broader idea of to what extent are undocumented migrants hurting South Africans versus just bad governance and corruption failing the people?
This is a big question, and if we ask many South Africans, they will feel at this point that immigration is one of the main reasons that we have some of the highest unemployment, inequality, and problems with service delivery. But if we look at the statistics, we look at the numbers, immigration, particularly undocumented immigration, is not behind these things. And most of the evidence suggests, in fact, that immigration of all kinds is producing more jobs and more opportunities for South Africans than it is taking.
Okay, let me ask Nonceba if you agree there. And if you can also help us understand who's actually funding these rallies, because it doesn't cost nothing to send busloads of people to various cities across South Africa, and some are arguing that there are political motivations behind what's happening. Where do you stand?
So firstly, I think I just need to correct the narrative that says that we are expelling immigrants from our country. What is happening right now in South Africa is a process of repatriation of those who want to leave the country, who would be in the country as undocumented immigrants, undocumented migrants rather. South Africa has the largest number of foreign nationals living in South Africa. If you look at the numbers compared to other countries in terms of the African continent, South Africa is actually the one country that is, as a receiving country, has the largest number of foreign nationals living in the country and who have lived in the country peacefully for many, many, many years. The reason I raise that is because there has been a narrative push that South Africans are anti-African people and that we are xenophobic, and the numbers simply do not support that. With regards to the protests, what we've said as the ANC is that there is legitimate concerns from South Africans around undocumented foreign nationals. The latest figures from our Stats SA, which is Statistics South Africa, our official statistics body, have indicated they account for about 3.6% of the population. So the number is very low, as the Prof has also said. And coming to your last question, we as the ANC have equally stated that we are concerned at the fingerprints of these marches, that there does seem to be an attempt where legitimate concerns are, have been used to politicize the matter and really cause instability in the country. We have seen attempts to use these marches as another attempt to bring unrest to our country, and we've cautioned against that. We've cautioned against, the attempts to have widespread looting and setting the country on fire. And of course, we saw, I actually just saw a report right now that yesterday we had about 120 marches countrywide, and of the 120 marches that we saw countrywide, 108 of those were peaceful, and that there were 12 reported that were not as peaceful as they should have been. But we also all, of course, want to know who's funding this and what really is the other agenda other than the legitimate grievances of the people of South Africa on the issue of illegal or undocumented migrants.
Okay, let me get Tendai into the conversation. I mean, there was a lot to pick up on there. But Tendai, first I need to ask you to help us here understand what undocumented migrants actually get when they come to South Africa from, versus staying in Malawi or Zimbabwe. Why is it, as Nonceba was saying, such an attractive destination for so many Africans that South Africa is carrying this disproportionate amount of migrants?
Thank you so much for that question. What they get is a livelihood. They get to feed and tend for their families. As you rightly pointed out, that they are coming to South Africa, whether legally or illegally, in search of what would term greener pastures. Most of them coming from my own country, Zimbabwe, from Malawi, and so many other countries. You'll find that most of these people are fleeing poverty. Some are even fleeing political persecution. So when they come to a country like South Africa, which is a continental economic powerhouse, what they essentially are looking for is a way to sustain themselves, to sustain their families.
And in doing that,
to destroy anyone's
right.
Family.
But in doing that, are they taking jobs from South Africans, which is the major complaint of those that are on the streets now?
That one is debatable. I cannot deny it, and at the same time, I cannot say definitely they are doing so. Let's put this into perspective. Most of these migrants, when they come to South Africa, undocumented or not, they are mostly looking at jobs that are, general labor, domestic work. Some of them are working on farms. Some of them are vending on the streets. So when they get there, obviously, they would offer cheap labor. An employer is out to maximize profit. So an employer naturally will select someone who is less of an expense, less of expenditure to them than the other. So if a South African, for instance, is expecting to be paid 10,000 Rand per month, and a foreigner comes and says, no, I'm ready to receive 5,000, half of that, the employer will naturally take the foreigner. So maybe that's where the issue comes in, that the South Africans will say, okay, that was supposed to be my job.
Yeah,
and you have come and have taken it.
And let me ask Loren, I want to ask Loren about that as well, because I have to be honest with you. I lived in South Africa for several years, and when I was looking for a place to live, more than one property owner actually told me, hey, the private guards here are from Congo. The gardener is actually Malawian, and if you need my domestic worker, she's Zimbabwean. As if they were proud to say they're not South African because there's too many complex issues in hiring local workers, and it's better to have foreigners. I was shocked. I didn't understand the dynamic then. But how prevalent is that line of thinking among employers in South Africa in kind of lower skilled jobs? And is anything being done to address that?
What we're seeing is that there are many sectors, or a number of sectors, where immigrants really dominate. So hospitality, certain parts of construction, other sectors where domestic work, where documents are not required, and where employers might value the immigrants' skills, their language skills, things like this. But we also have to keep in mind that there's a lot of petty trading or trading that's being done by immigrants, where they are creating jobs. There's estimates in recent research that in Joburg alone, traders bring in about $1 billion worth of money, bringing in fashion, clothing, other things into the country. Those are not replacing South African workers. So while we see competition in certain sectors, we see wage suppression, those are made up for by the fact that these business owners and creators are often hiring South Africans.
Let me ask Nonceba if you think they are. There is a balance there in accordance with Loren is describing. Because I would like for a second as well to listen to Julius Malema and what he had to say about the jobs issue.
Someone has come to fool you and make you think there is a big problem for you to fight with your own neighbors. You said they take jobs. I asked the question. 300 Ghanaians went back to Ghana 3 days ago. Show me 300 jobs which were created after those 3 Ghanaians left.
Yeah, Nonceba, it's a good question. I mean, how is a firebrand like Julius Malema, a voice that many felt was kind of ultra-nationalist in many ways, preaching against this hate, as he calls it, and pointing out why he thinks it's actually wrong to expel fellow Africans, documented or undocumented?
So I think just on the issue of the labor question, right? There are 2 elements to it. The first one was raised by one of the panelists to say that because South Africa does have a minimum wage under which an employer ought to not pay anyone below that. Highly regulated. We have a very active labor force in terms of your labor unions, etc. And so it has become a situation where employers have gone to sort cheaper labor, illegally so. And I'll make you an example of what I'm talking about. So in the last quarter labor force survey, for an example, if you look at some of the sectors that would have grown, the agriculture sector would be one of those sectors that would have had consecutive growth over the last couple of quarters. But if you look at the job growth numbers, insofar as registered workers in that very same sector, you'll actually find that the numbers of the registered workers in the same sector that is growing, consecutively over a few quarters has actually decreased. So if you go to certain sectors like your agriculture, your hospitality, and the other ones that have been mentioned by the panelists, you do find employers exploiting cheap, undocumented labor, which is why the government has now sought to increase labor inspections, and literally all the time when government does go out, because I'm also a member of government, when we do go out to do inspections, we will actually find that, there are illegal or rather undocumented workers working in factories, farms, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that we said we have to do is to go beyond just the fine, because what they do is that they know the labor inspectors will come, they will find undocumented work, and then after the fine they pay them, and then a month later they do the exact same thing. We look at our laws where we can now actually say beyond the fine, you should actually be jailed. So there is an attempt to really exploit cheap, undocumented labor because it's vulnerable, obviously. It's coming from another country, it's vulnerable, it's looking for a job, and they will obviously now take any job that does exist. On the point that Julius makes, I think that, as I said, there isn't, and this is the thing, because now we are viewed as people that are going around and, telling, because obviously how the matter has been reported in the media and what we see in the streets. For 32 years, foreign nationals in South Africa were fully integrated. They go to the same schools. Are from the Congo, for an example. We, share all aspects of life. So they are fully integrated in the social or the South African society. What has happened in the last couple of weeks and months has really been, pockets of trying to misrepresent our country as something that is not. At the beginning of the year, there were protests, for an example, that spoke about, undocumented children in schools and that they are taking over our schools. And the numbers don't support that. Less than 2% of children in South African schools are foreign nationals. 92% of them are actually South African citizens in those schools. But the narrative that is put out there is that foreign kids are taking over the schools, but the numbers do not support it. Stats SA, and I see that you're reporting on the Stats SA numbers. Stats SA also released numbers to say that it is untrue that we've got 5, 6, 10 million foreign nationals living in our country. The number is actually 2.4, which accounts for 4% of the population. So you can see that there is an attempt to really project us as people that are going around. In fact, the visuals that you're showing on your screen right now is, of course, part of that particular narrative. And it's very unfortunate, which is why we said as the ANC, we have to also guard against an attempt to paint our country in a particular way for reasons that are beyond, what we see as on the naked eye.
Right. I mean, Tendai, it is unfortunate, but unfortunately those images are real. And that is not just what fellow South Africans are seeing, but the world is seeing it. So how bad is this for South Africa reputationally? And will it risk fundamentally changing South Africa's relationship with its neighbors and in SADC as well as further afield?
In simple terms, yes. We saw that at the start of the World Cup, when South Africa played that opening match against, I think it was Mexico, and the whole of Africa was supporting Mexico. Everyone wished South Africa got beaten. So that tells you a lot about the sentiment across the continent, that this is more of, it's more than xenophobia, it's Afrophobia. You find that these are Africans attacking fellow Africans, and as rightly pointed out, based on flimsy, reasons that cannot be backed or justified by actual facts. How many Zimbabweans, how many Congolese or Malawians are actually taking South African jobs? Like Malema said, all these thousands of Zimbabweans and Malawians leaving the country right now by bus. How many jobs will now be created after 30 June? Now today is 1 July. How many jobs have been created? So the South African government needs to do more to address these issues that are taking place in the country. There's need also for the education of the people. I do not blame the actual ordinary South Africans themselves, because they are being misled. They actually believe that their jobs are being taken from them. They actually believe that the struggles that they're going through are because of foreigners. We saw this play out way back in Nazi Germany, when everything during the Great Depression was blamed on Jews. So it's so easy to find a scapegoat when things are not going well in your own country. So the ordinary South African, yes, they have grievances, and those grievances are legitimate, and they need to be addressed. But there are people who are taking advantage of that for their own political ends, to mislead the people, to find an enemy to be targeted, who is not the real enemy to be targeted.
Yeah.
So this is the problem that we are seeing. And as long as this is not addressed, South Africa will continue to lose its standing on the continent and in the Southern African region, because we now see South Africa more like they wanted to portray themselves as anti-African, more superior than everyone else, instead of us working together and integrating. The issue of migration did not start 10 years ago.
Right.
It started way back when the colonial powers came to South Africa and they started diamond mining and gold mining. They went.
Okay.
Most of these people even marching on the streets today claiming to be South African are most likely not even South African by descent. So
okay, let me get to where the clock is truly against us. And Loren, let me just get your opinion on one final issue that has obviously been addressed by all three of you. I've heard South Africans say that millions were kind of sold a dream post-apartheid that just hasn't been realized for so many of them. They're still living in the same townships with no real opportunity for gainful employment. It's not the fault of foreigners, according to what you're saying. So can it be addressed? Can it be fixed before it actually implodes again?
If we look at South Africa, there have been protests not just about immigrants, but against labor rights, about service delivery. This is something that is a part of South African civil society. Some of these are violent. Many of them, including the ones yesterday, are peaceful and represent people's perspectives. Will this result in a kind of economic transformation that can provide people a future? That is a question that I think we'll have to ask people in government. It will require a recapitalization of the state sector. It will require new economic policies. It means fighting corruption. We have elections coming up in November. A new government may be positioned better to do that, but the challenges right now are very grave and people are very angry. I wouldn't want the job of being in government right now, but I think it is an important perspective and one that hopefully will allow the country to turn a corner.
Nonceba, I can give you 1 minute for a response to that as a government member.
I think so. Firstly, there are already plans in place, and I'll just speak to the one which is the president's 5-point plan that he actually reiterated or spoke about a few weeks ago, which includes the issue of ensuring that, one, we look at our labor laws, we look at our immigration laws, we look at our ports of entry, but more than anything, we also look at the state of our economy and how we ensure that we get our economy back on track. One of the things that we often forget is that in 2021, we saw an uprising that actually plunged our economy right into a crisis where, because of unrest, we lost 15 billion. And we had just come out of COVID. So literally just as the country was getting back on its feet, there was this uprising, not even an uprising, it was unrest, which was very politically motivated by former members of the ANC who would have now wanted to see the country burning. We believe as the ANC that we are now 5 years later, again in another election year, and we are seeing the fingerprints of the exact same thing happening again in South Africa. And we do believe that there are attempts to really destabilize our country, particularly against the ANC president. Former President Thabo Mbeki spoke about this just yesterday to say that we must not be naive enough to think that the legitimate concerns of our people have not been hijacked for political ends to see the ANC ultimately out of power. If you look at the last 3 rounds of our elections that we have had, 4 or 5 months before an election, there is uprising, xenophobia, and all of that.
Okay.
It happened in 2021, it happened in 2019, and even the election before that.
That will unfortunately have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd really like to thank all 3 of my panelists so much for being with us, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.